Pause the video now if you'd like to do this question from the screen. The solution will be coming up in 5 seconds. Okay, for the first question, it's the most straightforward of them. We are just going to substitute in y for the square root of x. Now the difficult part here is spotting that x equals y squared, but if we get that correct, we get the quadratic that you see coming up on your screen now. We can complete the square in the way that you have been doing in your classwork, and we can go through and solve. Okay, so as we come to our conclusion for y, we may feel like stopping, but the original equation didn't have a y in it, it had an x in it. And we need to go and find out what x is equal to. And to do that, we have to recognise that y is the square root of x. So to find out x, we are going to square everything you see on the left-hand side. Okay, so this second question is a little bit more tricky. The idea is basically the same, that we are going to make y equal to that square root that we see in the equation. Now we're going to play around with that y equals the square root of x plus 2 because we want to get rid of just x on its own up here. So we need to make x the subject and replace y squared minus 2 where x is. That's the tricky part. And once you have that, the square root just changes to y and we leave minus 22. Now we're going to go on and just solve this in the usual way. And once we got our values for y, we have to remember the original equation had x's in it, didn't have any y's in it, so we need to find out what x's are. And by plugging our values of y into the equation directly above, we can find out our values of x. And if you check, both of those are solutions of the original. Okay, so this is staggeringly nasty, but the idea, the concept is the same again. We're going to make y equal that dodgy looking square root. We are then going to figure out what this stuff at the beginning is. And I want you to see a mistake that I make when I do my working here. Because originally, what I start thinking about is completing the square. That's the process I'm taking myself through because I want to make x the subject. That's what I'm thinking. I'm making x the subject and I'm going to get rid of the xy type stuff at the front. However, I get halfway through and what I've done is I've noticed the thing I'm trying to replace is actually already appeared in my working. It's right here, x squared minus 4x. So I notice this and I backtrack. I'm going to make the underlined terms, that bracket, the subject of my equation, and I can replace all of that all together, all at once, with y squared minus 3 over 2. But that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't started the process of trying to make x the subject. That is what makes this so difficult, is that we have a quadratic. And to make x the subject in a quadratic, you are completing the square. The fact that you have y squared on the other side makes no difference. You're just leaving it there and letting it get caught up in the algebra. Okay, so as we get our values for y, which you see on the screen, we actually have to go back and solve our equation to find out what x is. So on the right hand side of the equation, once you'll notice we have y squared. So we're going to figure out what y squared is by squaring our surdy bracket, which you did in the last chapter. We are then going to put that in place of y squared into this equation. So we have a quadratic and then a constant on the other side of the quadratic, which has got a square root in it. So it's looking pretty nasty, but it is just a quadratic for us to solve. So solve it we will. In fact, technically it's two quadratics. So the one I'm going to look at is the one where this is a positive, and then we'll look at the negative one immediately after that. So we now reach this uncomfortable step where we have to square roots a third, or a third with a number added to it. So we get this ugly looking thing where we have a square root underneath another square root. But it is the right thing to do. And that's two of our answers, just two of them. But I want us to revisit this idea of, we looked up at the top here, we looked where it was positive. We're now going to look where it's negative. In fact, I'm just going to show you where the negative appears in the working for the positive version. That's the only thing that's affected in our working as we go down. And in fact, what you're going to get is no other changes to our working. All of these positives that you see on the screen being corrected are now negatives. So what you see is 4 different solutions. There are 2 solutions given by the plus or minus, and for each of those there are 2 more for each of these. So that's 2 lots of 2, or 4 solutions available. Tough question. If you enjoyed that, think about further math.